Anthony Davis came out today with a video where he's sitting down with Shams Charania of ESPN, and there is some more pressure being applied to the Lakers front office here today. I've got to say that for Laker fans, I'm sure this is pretty exciting for the most part. A segment of fans probably doesn't like this, but I think for a lot of the fans that have been invested in this team, do like the current build of the team, or excuse me, like the stars on the team, and want to see the team go in and make the current addition better and see what they can do. This is probably more for you. But if you guys are new, make sure you subscribe to the Basketball Bulletin, because 80% of viewers aren't currently subscribed. So make sure you do stick around going forward. Let me know in the comments what you think about this. So this is all kind of popping up where we're in a time period where we're just a couple of weeks away from the trade deadline. And we're starting to see the Lakers stars kind of come out a little bit more. Like LeBron was on, I don't know whose podcast it was recently, but he was saying a couple of weeks ago, oh, our team isn't what it's going to be. And you could maybe understand that a couple of different ways. It could be, oh, maybe he means like we're going to get healthy. But then you think about the fact that it's LeBron, and I don't like to give him some like mastermind amount of credit. Like I feel like sometimes people give him a little too much credit with he's smart. He knows what he's saying stuff, right? But I digress. I mean, I'm sure he kind of was probably implying that, hey, I want us to make trades, and that's kind of been the undertone this season, because if you go back to last year, the Lakers sat out the trade deadline. And I brought all that up to say that the Lakers have players and they have stuff that they can use to get some internal growth. However, when we approached the deadline and they were starting to lose those games, and they opted not to make any trades because they hadn't made any trades until DFS a couple of weeks ago, since the D'Angelo Russell Rui trade before that, but the D'Lo and Russell Westbrook, like that trade, that was like the last one they made. So basically like 2 years. So anyway, when we started losing those games, then, like I said, the front office sat out, and then ultimately the team never really got upgraded. And it was pretty crazy because you transitioned to the offseason, and Rob in the season prior gave a lot of guys like Jackson Hayes, Cam Reddish, Christian Wood, all player options. And so you were kind of in a position where the Lakers were basically forced to run back the exact same team that already showed you they didn't have enough. One thing Trevor was saying a lot was, the benefit to playing the Nuggets in the first round last year was that you would see what you needed, and you would know if you had enough with this team. And you would have to make changes in the offseason. That didn't wind up happening. Now, the funny thing is, when they sat out the trade deadline prior, Rob Pelinka said, oh, we didn't like any trades out there. But the good news is, in the offseason, I believe he said we have 3 first-round picks that will trade, all this and that. That didn't wind up happening. We're still sitting on the same picks. In fact, one of them, I believe, was the Dalton Connect pick, which you could argue is, you just got to take that one. He's a great player, profiles to be a guy with high potential. Well, profiles to be a good NBA player for a long time, I like to say. He's a little bit older, so it's kind of hard to gauge with those guys what their actual ceiling is. But nonetheless, you kind of have to take him. But they didn't make any trades. So I said all that to say that here we are with AD. Because LeBron's recently did it. LeBron had that quote where he said, the team, the way we're constructed. It's funny because out of context, it sounds really bad, but then he elaborates and it's not as bad. But typically there's only one line that you see, right? But LeBron ultimately did say, the way we're constructed, we have to play perfect basketball, which implies that they need a trade. So I'm going to play this video from Shams here.
What more can be done with this roster? Are you satisfied with the roster? Do you feel like you guys need some more here?
I think we need another big. I feel like I've always been at my best when I've been the 4. And having a big out there, we know it worked when we won the championship with JaVale and Dwight. I'm at the 5 and I'm at the 4.
This historic.
Okay, so he said a lot of things, and that's just a little excerpt from this where it's not the full thing. They actually go ahead and talk about more of the things like, the fire situation in LA and stuff like that. Now, I think it's interesting because AD is basically saying point blank, I want to play the 4. Right. The funny thing about that is that this isn't the first time that we've heard about this. We've heard about him telling the front office, get me bigs for years. And it's really been a few years where he's had to play most of his minutes, if not all of his minutes, at the center position. And, when we go back to that 2020 roster, I think a lot of people misremember this year. It's kind of weird, but I think it's a lot of just saying the same stuff. Like we're all kind of agreeing, but just kind of going about it a little bit differently. Let me explain. So when you look at this team, you see the players here we had that are bigs. AD, you had Dwight Howard, Kyle Kuzma's a power forward. Damn, listen at 6'10". My God, is Kuz really 6'10"? I thought he was like 6'8", 6'9". I mean, it's all relatively the same, right? JaVale Markeith was added as a buyout player later on that year. It's not like they had a ton of bigs, but what they did do is they started AD at the 4, and they started him with JaVale, with Dwight getting bench minutes, and that worked out pretty well for them. Obviously, they were able to win ultimately, but AD played about, I think, 60% of his minutes at the power forward, but the other 40 anyway, a good chunk of his minutes at the center position. And then in the playoffs, the entire situation changed. There were entire series where I'm not sure it happened to JaVale, but I know for a fact it happened to Dwight. Who was it, against the Rockets, where he just goes completely out of the rotation? They went away from him. And that's where they really benefited from having Markeith, because they all of a sudden were able to go to these quote unquote small ball looks with AD and Markeith, or Markeith, AD off, and then Markeith, LeBron, Kuzma, which is 6'9", 6'10", 6'8". That's a big front court. Like, I think people kind of also say this small ball stuff, like, it's not really small. The benefit to this Lakers team was that when you put AD at the center, he's 6'10", 250. He's still bigger than most guys, but he's agile, or at that time, he was super agile. He's not as much anymore, but he was super agile, was able to move like a gazelle out there, and he could rotate. He could play everywhere. He could still do some of that same stuff, but he just doesn't move the same physically. But it was still big. The Lakers' small ball was bigger, faster, stronger than everybody else. That's why for the season, they were the best team. They were probably already going to win anyway. So, ultimately, that's kind of what they wanted to have. And then AD references this team. When we talk about the Lakers, we always go back and reference this team. And that's understandable. It was only a handful of years ago. They did win the championship, and that's fair, right? That is absolutely fair. It's just LeBron and AD are in very different times in their lives, careers, and physically. LeBron, he's not the same player. He's able to mask most of his deficiencies, but you really see it more so in terms of how much energy he can exert on the defensive side of the ball. It's not there to the same degree. But when we talk about bigs, like I said, it's been a couple of years, because even in 21, they actually doubled down. The funny thing is, we go back to 2020, that team, I actually think, got better in 21, and they doubled down, and AD played less of his minutes. I think it was a 91-9 split of power forward minutes. 90% of his minutes, I think, this year played power forward, which is more than the championship year. And this is all just going off of memory, because you can find this information. I've seen it before. But this year they had Marc Gasol, Montrezl Harrell. They did pick up, they had LeBron, Kuz, and they still had Markeith running it back with those guys. But they also picked up Drummond later on in the year. So they were a really big team. But I really think that this team, if you go back to the offseason around this team, everyone was giving them kudos for the way that they were able to, kind of revamp the roster, because they wanted to revamp this team, because they were coming off a short offseason, and they had some older guys like Dwight had a whole thing where he was coming back, and he announced he was coming back. Then like 10 minutes later, deleted that tweet and wasn't coming back. Like, it was weird. But they wanted to kind of revamp the roster around some of these guys. And that's kind of why some of the older guys aren't there, but they still have the younger guys like Caruso and stuff. But again, a very big roster. And then we look at 22. This is the Carmelo year, but they had, again, centers this year too. Jay Huff, Dwight came back this year, did not look great that year, but could just be because the roster wasn't great. DeAndre didn't look great here. Ironically, looks okay now for the Nuggets, like passable, but they had a lot of bigs this year too. So what happened? Well, in 22, 23, and now this year, they've had other centers that are rostered: Damian Jones, Mo Bamba, Thomas Bryant, but 80s wound up playing nearly 100, like 96-4 or 100%. Like, that's how the splits have been over the last few years of his minutes at the center position. So this is why, for the last couple seasons and so far this season, so basically 2.5 years, he has been asking to play alongside another big, because it takes some of the burden off of him. I don't really, like, personally, you could disagree. Personally, I don't think that, it's the thing where people say he gets most of his injuries at the center. If you look at when they're occurring, they're kind of just freak. It doesn't really have anything to do with him banging. But what I do think is that there is legitimacy to him wearing down because of the fact that he bangs with other players. But the counterpoint to that is that he is having one of his best statistical years of his career this year. And secondly, he's been really healthy over the last couple of years. That's the counterpoint to that argument. But he's been really healthy over the last couple of years. Like he played over 70 games last year, something like that. That's pretty great. So that's more or less where it is. But the Lakers there have been reports of them out there trying to get another big player. For a while, I was pretty sure Jonas was going to come. There was just so much smoke around that, but it didn't wind up happening up to this point anyway. And I'm not sure he's what the Lakers need anyway, unless you're just desperate for a big-bodied guy to plug in at the center to get you 15, 20 minutes. I mean, that's fine. But I think his deficiencies are pretty straightforward. I think one of the main reasons why you would want a big guy, whether that's him or otherwise, is so AD can slot at the power forward position. By the way, like I told you, in 2020, he still played almost half his minutes at center. So understand that he's still going to play a lot of minutes at center, even if they get another center, whether it's Walker Kessler or otherwise. I think what you could do is you could put that big guy on somebody else like a Jokic or whatever. They may individually get flambéed, but you could have AD come over and help, which is where AD really excels. He's not able to do that when he has to be the guy taking that matchup. It's more about the optionality of being able to put out different looks as opposed to AD being the only big guy on the roster that's NBA caliber right now. Like some of the other guys that could be there, like Koloko eventually. Hayes is like once every 5 games, it looks like an NBA player, but they don't really have guys like that are actual bigs. And part of me thinks they've been wanting to run like some small ball switch scheme looks with Vando when he's back out there. Him, DFS, Rui, LeBron. Cam's not in the rotation, but ideally somebody like Max or Cam. I think they want to run like 4 or 5 man groupings of those wings and just do a lot of switching. I think that's one of the things that they really want to do, which I think could work against some teams. But I think you still need to have the big guy on the roster, which is something they flat out don't have. Now, personally, I would love if that player was Walker Kessler. There have actually been reports about the Lakers targeting Walker Kessler for forever. The recent report from Sidery was that, and with Sidery, I'm not really sure personally how legitimate it is. But anyway, there was reports that they would have to include Connect, right? And that's a very split topic because Connect's potential upside, like I said earlier, I don't really know, but he's flashed it where he's gotten a couple 30-point games already going back to the preseason. Yeah, he's flashed it. But I think the floor is so much higher with Walker that I would probably personally make it. And that's just me, of course. But Walker's also one of the best bigs in the league, just physically. Best, like, imposing bigs. He's also one of the best rebounders, defensive shot blockers. Like, he's a great player to plug alongside AD, especially if AD's able to shoot the 3 ball again. Part of the reason why they moved away from AD so much at the power forward is because he stopped being able to shoot and he got bigger, right? Like, and he got slower as a result. Like, AD's always the last guy up the court most of the time. So like those things matter. But I do wonder if maybe his motor improves if he's not asked to play the center all game long. So anyway, this has always been and always will be a divisive topic among the Laker fandom. There's always been a huge split. Most people will say, or a lot of people will say, AD is a center. That's it. Don't tell me anything else about it. Don't provide any context. He's a center, or he's a power forward, excuse me, not a center. Don't tell me anything else about it. No context. It doesn't matter. He's a power forward. He says he wants to be a power forward. That's all that matters. I personally think that, again, it's about the optionality. But if you try to tell them otherwise, people don't want to hear it. If you try to tell people that he's a center, not a power forward, and you say the things I've listed in this video, like, he's slower, blah, 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 they don't want to hear it, right? Because it also comes down to AD says what he wants to do. Okay, you can feel how you want about that part of it. But let me also tell you, LeBron didn't want to play point guard in 2020, but they won. Like, I'm sure a lot of guys do things that they don't necessarily want to do. But one thing I think everybody that's a Lakers fan can agree on is that this team desperately needs another